Hey there, Liberty Tree. I guess today, since I'm solo, we're going to call this a Liberty Branch. I guess we'll call this. My husband is off making the hard-earned money, so I'm at home and I am just feeling very passionate about something that has come up in the news recently. And I know you might have seen that title. A monkey can teach that, and I promise that is not clickbait. I am really going to address that because there's nothing more that I hate on social media than seeing clickbait, and you click on it and it has absolutely nothing to do with the story. But it actually has something to do with it. It is something that I have said for many, many years. And yeah, there's an element of absurdity to it, but I'm going to point that out why I do say that. Anyway, so what we're going to be talking about today is my wheelhouse. It's education. There's been a lot in the news, especially in Florida. If you're following conservative news, education news, anything about Ron DeSantis and how evil a man he is, you know about Corey, DeAngelis and all these other players who are talking about school choice, the movers and shakers who are really pushing forward, finally, after all these years, trying to get school choice front and center. And there have been pockets of it over the past, I'm going to say 20 years or so, where we've really been trying to get charter schools going, trying to get public schools to really, because what it does is when you have school choice, it makes public schools better. I know that is not what they tell you, but because of competition, it will make public schools better. And where you see pockets of cities and towns where they are pushing and have successfully pushed through school choice, public schools are made to work harder at achievement. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But one of the things that really got under my skin this week was if you follow, especially if you're a homeschool mama, I'm sure you've seen this video or seen people talking about it, tweeting on it, posting Facebook posts on it. I'm not on Facebook, so I have no idea what's been said. If you follow Allie Beth Stuckey, you know exactly. She did a really excellent long podcast on this. And it's about Jen Wilkin was in a debate with the Gospel Coalition. And we can talk about the Gospel Coalition another time and what I think of it. And I'm not even going to talk about what I think of Jen Wilkin. She is a women's Bible teacher. And if you are not a Christian homeschooling mama, please don't go away. I want you to stay here and listen, because this is not about Christian homeschool mamas. This is about homeschooling and school choice. And I really want to bring a perspective that you're not going to hear from a lot of people, because I'm coming at it from experience as a teacher. So let's start there. Why am I talking about it? Why do I have, since everybody talks about what's your experience? How do you have, what can you say to it? I can say a lot to it because I actually am a teacher. I am a language arts teacher. And I've been a teacher, probably 32 years now. Got my degree in 1991. So been a teacher for a very, very long time. I love kids, and my passion is teaching kids. And so I taught in public schools as a substitute teacher for a year and a half. Yeah, I know, and you're going to say oh, that's it. No, that is not all my experience. It was that experience alone, though, that made me realize that my mother-in-law was right, that I really needed to consider homeschooling. At the time, I was terrified of telling my father that I was not going to use my degree and become a homeschooling mother. But as time went on, I realized the benefit to homeschooling, especially with my experience, although at the time, yes, limited, but it did give me the courage to do it. Now, over the years, that experience teaching in public school, I really hearken back to that a lot because one of the things that, even though if you knew me now, a lot of people know my husband might say I'm a little bit of a hot-headed Italian at times. I get really passionate about certain things. I was really meek and mild back in those days. And even then, out of a school class of about 1,000 kids that I graduated with, I went to a teacher's college in Pennsylvania. And I was the only student who refused to join the union. Now, the union has their junior version that they have in, at university. And to my counselor's chagrin, I refused ever so quietly, meek and mildly. I don't want to be a part of an organization that supports abortion. And that was over 30 years ago, right? Fast forward to starting to try to find a job teaching, and you're told point blank, you'll never get a job until you join the union. And that really opened up my eyes. And when I went into the teacher's lounge when I was out of school for a day, I taught at 5 or 6 different school districts. And I would go into the lunchroom and literally, as if we were in kindergarten, the teachers would get up from the table and go sit at another table and leave me alone. And let me tell you, as a young teacher, that is a real eye-opener. It shows you the peer pressure that already before you even get there, the entire school teaching staff knows you are not going to play along and you're not going to abide by the rules that they set. So I learned that lesson really early on, that my instincts on the stinkiness of the National Education Association was there. And so that just started a long journey for me of investigating educationally wise. Why is homeschooling good? Why are charter schools good? Why is private school good? And we're going to go over some of the myths over homeschooling specifically, but because we're really starting to see school choice coming back into the news in many different states, it is an option that a lot of parents aren't going to have if you can't homeschool. And granted, I'm not going to tell you, because I'm a homeschool mama, and I've been a homeschool mama. I have 6 kids. And yes, I homeschooled all of them. I'm on my last one. And I've even homeschooled a child with Down syndrome. So I want you to, and I homeschooled 2 with dyslexia, which really, and we'll get into that part of my journey as an educator, was that you can homeschool any child. So that's one of the myths we're going to be talking about. But there are families who can't homeschool, and I'm not going to be sitting here, as a homeschool mom saying, yes, you need to homeschool. There are some families who just can't do it. And I'm not here to put a guilt trip on you. I'm going to encourage you, and I'm going to challenge you, perhaps, to maybe, take a long look at, is that a possibility? While we're waiting for more charter schools to pop up across our state, whatever state you're living in, or maybe looking for, in terms of school choice coming up, looking at whatever public school district you might be able to start busing your kids to. I think that's going to start happening again too. Not again, for the first time. But I want to talk to you about, so I'm not going to be here guilt tripping you into homeschooling, right? But I am going to encourage you to really take a serious look at it. And we can go over statistics, homeschooling, grades, graduation rates versus public school. Look, you can certainly find, debunkers of homeschooling are going to say, no, that's not true. No, statistically, homeschoolers far, far surpass public school graduates in terms of grades and graduation rates, and then graduation rates from college. So we're not even going to get into that because I'm not going to use this episode to get into the weeds on data. Now, when it comes to standardized testing, they also, public homeschoolers surpass public schoolers on standardized tests. But I am not an advocate of standardized tests. I think that they are just a very poor way of analyzing and assessing a student's intelligence. It is only standardized tests give, if you're looking at the color spectrum, of the rainbow, you're only looking at 2 or 3 colors of the spectrum using a standardized test, because intelligence is so much more comprehensive than what a standardized test is going to show for a student. Now, over the years, one of the things that I have really delved into in terms of furthering my education, even though I have no further degree to show that, is I have spent many years studying how to help kids learn who have been correctly diagnosed or incorrectly labeled with a learning disability. And that's anything from, as I said, 2 of my kids had dyslexia, and that's really what started me on my journey, studying how do you teach a child to learn correctly, especially in my field when my specialty is language arts. So I've really honed my specialty to teaching children to read who have either or just a great learner or who have really a lot of difficulty learning how to read. And I've actually helped kids in their teens relearn how to read properly, because there are techniques that you can use. It's called brain training. And so what you want to do is assess a child's learning style, for one thing. And that's one of the things that you can't do in public school. And so I'm going to start going into these myths about homeschooling, because it's really, when I was mentioned Jen Welkin. She was in this debate, and I'm not even going to go into the video clips of it, because you can go in and see them yourself. They're all over social media, and if you're a homeschool mama, I know that you saw them. But one of the things she said was that she wasn't pushing you to have your kids in public school, but 2 sentences later, she was pushing Christians to put their kids in public school because they're a necessary part of the community. Without public school, basically, all society is going to rot on the vine, which is kind of a weird, her whole argument in the debate was just very strange. It was up and down and up and down and up and down. And I felt like there needed to be a good perspective on bringing the conversation back to the very basic question of what is school for? Okay, school is not for socialization. And I know that over the past 50 years, we have really let the left drive this dogmatic, almost a religiosity, adherence to school is for teaching kids how to be correctly socialized and how to go out into society and, be a part of society. But is it really the right place to do that? First of all, is that the job of school? No, and I would say it is not. School is for education. It is for children to go and, it's a novel concept, but to learn, okay? We should be sending our kids there to learn reading and writing, and yes, in cursive, and math, not Common Core math. They need to be learning addition, subtraction, division. They should be learning the basics of what we would call a classical education. And that includes literature, which is really important. school is for learning information. It's for critical thinking. It should be a place where all ideas are brought out in a classroom and talked about and discussed. And we don't do that anymore. We have bought into this notion. As I said, it's such a religious dogma adherence to this idea that children are to be brought into a almost like a cattle farm and they're going to be taught certain socialization techniques, and that is what is going to get them, out into the world and be successful. That's not what school is for. That's what family is for. That's what mom and dad are for. Your job is, as mom, as dad, your job is to socialize your kids. I always say when parents would ask me over the past 25 years, I guess been homeschooling for 25 years. One of the biggest questions I get and the biggest myth I want to debunk is that homeschool kids aren't socialized. Of course they're socialized. I mean, to the level of, mom and dad's, decision making in terms of what I don't know one homeschool kid who I would say is, like a hermit and lives at home and it can't ever be socialized. I mean, it's a ridiculous comment. And so when I would have that question posed to me, yeah, but what about socialization? And I would say, yeah, if you would like your third grader to learn how to pick their nose really well, send them to school. They'll learn it really, really well. Like that's what kind of socialization is going on. Sorry about this creaky stool here. And so socialization is a myth. Yes, kids are socialized. I know I would say easy 95% of homeschoolers I know, they do extracurricular activities, sports, drama, choir of some kind. They do get involved in politics. Our kids were always involved in politics. You get out, you do church plays. You're always out. I mean, yes, it's such a myth. The question is, what kind of socialization is good, is beneficial? You want to raise your kids to be able to go out into the world and be a successful employee or be a successful business owner or be a successful college student, right? One of the things that public school does not teach, first of all, is critical thinking, to be able to teach those skills to say, well, if I go get a job when I'm in college, right, or I'm just going to college, or I'm going to go get a job instead of going to college, am I going to be a better employee? Am I going to be a better student if I have critical learning skills or if I don't? And of course, you're going to be a better employee if you have critical learning skills. And if you are taught, one of the benefits of homeschooling is that you really have to teach yourself a lot of things. Most mamas I know who homeschool, and yeah, it's usually the mamas, but hey, dad, you could homeschool. Maybe your wife has a really good job and you want to keep that income. Homeschooling can be done in so many different ways. Maybe if you can't give up both incomes, maybe grandma's willing to do it, or maybe an aunt, or maybe another family member is willing to do that for you. Think outside the box. I know some really great homeschooling dads, and so it doesn't have to necessarily be mama, but having a parent leading that, boy, I can just tell you, we'll get into the benefits later, but I'm just so passionate about family being together because it's so good, so much fun. And so when you're talking about socialization, being at home, first of all, you're socializing, learning how to socialize siblings together. That does not happen in schools, right? What do they learn in schools? They learn to hate each other. I mean, let's be honest about that, okay? Kids learn that you're supposed to go home and you're supposed to hate your little brother, hate your little sister. She took my things. No, right? You hate your parents. You don't have that, by and large, in homeschooling, because you learn to be a team. You learn that your siblings aren't bad, right? Now, it does depend on the mama or the dad, whoever is homeschooling. Like, you really have to, have some semblance of organization through the day, not let things go into chaos. But the thing is, too, is that I always tell parents, that's another myth, is that you can't teach your kid. You can't. As a mom, as a dad. All right. So one of the things that really got my goat last week, or maybe it was, early this week, it was last week. I was watching this teacher, and she was impassionately speaking to the school board over, all these conservatives coming out of the woodwork and acting like they knew what to tell the school board and what curricula to pick and what books should be banned and blah, blah, blah. And she was saying, what degrees do they have? I have a master's degree. I know what's best. A lot of parents have degrees, for one thing, it was such an arrogant thing to say. A lot of parents have doctorates. A lot of parents have master's degrees. A lot of parents have college degrees. A lot of parents just have high school degrees, and that's okay too. You still can have the ability to homeschool, to teach your child. Now, here's where I'm going to say something that is going to make a lot of people upset. A monkey can teach. A monkey can teach. All right? If they get to have the absurd argument that you have to have a master's degree to be able to teach children, then I get to be absurd and say a monkey can teach them, because they're both absurd. It's absurd to say of course a monkey can't teach a classroom of children. But it's absurd to say you have to have a master's degree to be able to teach children. Teaching is an art. Look, I remember being in college 30 some years ago. It wasn't as dogmatic as it is now, but we clearly got the message through teaching college that, we will know what's best for the children. Parents, not so much. They really can't understand what goes on in a classroom. They really can't understand this history book we're giving to their fourth grader to take home to do homework. Like, we want parents to do the homework with them, but they can't actually understand it. We're the high and mighty teachers. We know what to do. Like, that's a ridiculous argument to make. But it really is, it's taught. It's drilled into you in college. You know what's best for kids, and parents don't. And now, my goodness, with libs of TikTok posting so many videos, and it's, yes, of course, do I have to say the disclaimer? There are lots and lots of good teachers out there. Okay, there are lots and lots of good teachers out there. But I would say this to my fellow teachers, especially my fellow Christian teachers: you should not be a part of the National Education Association or the American Federation of Teachers. They are evil organizations, and someday you're going to have to stand before Jesus and account for the money that you sent to those organizations. And I'm just going to leave it at that, because there's really something that bothers me, that you say, I love teaching, and that is excellent. And it's good to have good teachers, good godly teachers who care about what's right and wrong being in a classroom. But then you can't say that you're also not going to have the courage to fight against those evil organizations. And they are evil because they are promoting. Look, you know what they're promoting. And if I go into all that, this video is going to be taken down. And I would really like it to stay up. You know what they're promoting. So fellow teachers, get a spine. Okay. Back to the kids. One of the things that you have to get over is the idea that kids aren't going to be socialized. Next thing is, and I know I was going on a point and I forget that, but look, you have to understand, you have to just because you don't have a degree, you don't have a master's degree, you don't have a doctorate, you can still teach. You can still teach. And that is, that is one of the I would say the second biggest myth. Socialization, definitely the first one. Second one is that really kind of goes along with charter schools and Christian schools and homeschooling. They kind of all get this myth together that the teachers are subpar. They're the teachers who couldn't make it in a big public school. And that is so untrue. If you can choose a Christian school, my goodness, I know it's expensive because it's an expense you don't have, but those teachers are working for peanuts. I have had many friends who've taught in Christian schools. I taught in a Christian school for a year. They are dedicated, humble, wonderful teachers who do it only because they love children and they love teaching, because believe me, they are not paying their bills working in a Christian school. And a lot of charter schools are the same way. They're making a lot less money than the public schools, and they're there because they want to teach to the best that they possibly can. They want to be able to, I mentioned before, it's called classical education, where you're learning the classics, the classic techniques of debate and thought and debating one another without getting offended. I mean, that's such a novel thought in today's society. Debating, having one kid talk about say evolution, and one kid talking about, 6-day creation theory, and nobody's angry. They just discuss it. That's a classical education. And you really don't see that anymore, except in charter schools and homeschools and public school or in private schools, because having that as your basis of education is really important, because that is what builds life skills, to be able to go out into the world and not get offended at every single thing someone says to you, and to be able just to be calm and say, hey, let's talk about that. Let's discuss that idea. And let's, maybe meet for coffee. Those are the skills that have been left behind in public school. The other thing is that what you get in charter schools, homeschooling, obviously, because you're going to have the number of kids that you have had, are smaller class sizes, is a huge factor. It's a huge factor, not just from the learning side, but from the teaching side. When you have 30 plus kids in a classroom, you cannot be effective. You can't. And the reason why is because you can't teach to 5 different learning styles in that classroom. And that's just a basic breakdown of learning styles. I've got 6 kids. I've got 6 different learning styles. And you have to tailor what makes education work. Look, it's the reason why parents hire a tutor, right? Like I always say, why would you hire a tutor then? If one-on-one education is at your house doesn't work, then why do parents hire a tutor if you're having trouble in school with math or science, or having trouble reading? Why hire a tutor if it doesn't work? Because of course it works. Because what that tutor is going to do is going to ask you some questions and maybe do a lesson with you and get an idea of what your learning style is. And what you find oftentimes, and I saw this, in school, and mostly in my experience over the years, I've had, so many parents come to me asking me for help, in some kind of coaching way. Like, they said my kid can't learn. Said my kid has a learning disability, but I know he's really smart, and I don't understand how they can say that, about my son. And so I say, well, come on over. And sure enough, sometimes it was a learning disability. And sometimes it was just because the child hadn't been taught how to learn to read correctly. They were taught a whole language approach, which is totally terrible, a terrible way to learn how to read, which was big in the 60s when my generation was growing up. you have to teach phonics. You have to teach kids how to decode sounds. And sometimes that process can take a lot longer for one child than it does for another, especially for, we call them kinesthetic learners, the wiggle worms. The kids are like always moving in their seats and they can't sit down. It drives the teacher crazy because they're making noise all the time and they're banging the desk and they're drawing all the time. Yeah, those are the kids that are always yelled at, and breaks my heart because all they need are some simple techniques to help their brain remember information. And that's all that a learning style is. It's the way your brain is wired to receive information and bury it away in your brain. It's as simple as that. And so you can't do that in a school when you have 30 plus kids. It's hard enough when there are 10 kids in a classroom. But a teacher, the fewer kids in the classroom, obviously the better chance a teacher has to say, look, I've got 6 kinesthetic learners. I'm going to put up a table and I'm going to let them have a standing desk. That is such a simple remedy, right? To let kids who are really, do you like sitting 8 hours a day? Really? No, why would your child like sitting 8 hours a day then? Why would we expect a child to sit 8 hours a day when you get up and down to go to the water cooler 10 times an hour because you're so tired of sitting? Like, why do we expect our children to do what we can't do? What isn't normal? It's not normal to sit 8 hours a day. And so give those kids an outlet, give them little wiggle things to, quiet fidget toys, not the ones that go clicky, click, clickety, click, that drives me crazy. But give them some soft things to hold. That's the way their brains are wired to receive information and bury it. Because when you don't, that information, they're hearing all this information. If they're a kinesthetic visual learner and they've got an auditory teacher who loves didactic teaching and they're just, giving a sermon, every day for 45 minutes, and the kids was like, wah, 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 wah. That's what goes right over their head. But give them a method to engage their senses, and that information is going to piggyback. You've activated the sense of touch, which kinesthetic learners love. It's touch or movement. If you allow a kid to stand up and tap his foot quietly, that information that they're hearing is going to piggyback on those activated neurons in their brain because you've allowed them to activate those sense of touch neurons. That information piggybacks and it gets buried deeper in their brain processing. And that's it in a nutshell of what happens. But that can't happen in public schools. It happens to some degree, and I'll tell you who it happens for. The visual learners, the kids who were so good at sitting quietly, and that was me, right? Sitting quietly, reading a book, open your book, sit quietly, read and learn. That's who public school really, really works for. Auditory learners, anyway, I'm just going to do a whole show on that someday. But that's why school size, class size matters, because you can't teach effectively to a classroom of so many, because the teacher already has a learning style. You teach out of a learning style. And so you're teaching one way and you're missing 2/3 of the class. And where they're just kind of scrambling, trying to catch up to the kids who already are match the teacher's learning style. And so homeschooling is so fantastic for that reason, because you can, and mamas know best. You know your kids best. You know your kids best. You know what makes them tick. You know what pushes their buttons. You know how, look, you may have a morning kid. You may have a night owl. I have 2 night owls. They did far more work and far faster. Their work they did much faster in the late afternoon than if I got them up at 8 o'clock in the morning to get started. Because they were like, I'm so tired, and not paying attention. So there are so many benefits to being at home, because you can say, you know what? All right, start your class at start your classwork at 2 in the afternoon. Shocking that I would say that, right? No, start at 2. If you have a night owl kid, so what if they're doing school at 8 p.m.? Does it really matter when it's getting finished? No, because that's when their brain is awake. So let them tune their brain into when they're really alert, and have them do other things in the morning, like maybe occupy one of the little ones in your home. Maybe you've got a baby or a toddler and they need, to give you a break so that you can focus on maybe one of your other kids who needs help with school. That kid can go in the playpen or take, little sister out back and push her on the swing or do something. And that's family bonding. And that's what I love homeschooling. That's what I love most about it, is that you're together. And yes, it gets tiring. Yes, okay, it gets tiring some days. Some days you're just like, I'm going to pull my hair out. You are. Like, that's just the way it is. But you do that at work. If you have, this is a job. Homeschooling is a job, right? So when I say at work, I mean at a different place of work, right? You pull your hair out some days there, and you think, oh, if only I could help. Oh, my word. If I had a nickel for every woman who ever said, you're so lucky because you homeschool. I never had that opportunity. You know what? Make your opportunity. I'm so beyond being quiet about that. Little knife in the back comment. You know what? I sacrificed a lot. And you, homeschool mama, I know you're sacrificing a lot to do the same thing for your kids. And you, mama of 3 kids in Christian school, I know you are sacrificing a lot to keep your kids there, because you're really looking at the bigger picture. You're looking at the question we're really dove into in the beginning of this podcast, is what is the purpose of school? It's to learn information, not to learn how to pick your nose really well, not to learn what bathroom you're allowed to go in, not to learn how to say yay to the teacher with pink and blue hair. No, you're there to learn to add, subtract, multiply, divide, algebra. Okay, so I do want to point out, and I know I'm going to get a comment about, well, of course you need a degree to teach the higher sciences. Well, of course you have to know how to do that. Like, I'm not an idiot. Like, of course. I've had lots of people. So like, yes, okay, a monkey, I'm going to go back to that. A monkey can teach that, okay? That's absurd, right? How many of you have known people with a doctorate who seem like the stupidest person on the planet, right? No common sense, couldn't put 2 words together to save his life, and you're telling me that piece of paper makes you qualified. It doesn't. Teaching is an art. I don't care what anybody tells you that teaching is a science and you have to know. You cannot teach someone to teach. You either have it in you to be able to present information to a child, an adult, any age. You have to have that thing in you. It's intuitive. It's an intuitive art to be able to say, okay, you read somebody's face and know, you know what, they're not getting it that way. So you pivot. And you take 5 seconds in your brain. It's a really fast thing. And you say, I got to present this in a different way. And you pull the blocks out, or you pull a piece of paper out and you draw, or you get them up out of their desk and you make spaghetti noodles. Like, you pivot really fast to know I'm not getting through. And then you switch, you pivot, you change the way you're approaching that, presenting that information. And then the light goes on in their face. And you're like, all right, they got it. You can't teach that. You can't teach that to someone to be able to do that. You either have it or you don't. And then it's a process of honing those skills and honing your ability to know, if I have to teach this, do I have the ability to teach it in 5 different ways? That's what a good teacher does. And that's what homeschooling does. That's what a small Christian school class size does. And And I want to talk about that is that, I asked you mamas who, didn't want to hang around for a Christian podcast. Okay. Homeschooling is not for Christians. There are many, many, many homeschoolers who are not doing it for religious reasons. Yeah, a lot of Catholics do it. A lot of Christians do it for sure. And they do it because they want to teach their kids a biblical point of view, a biblical worldview, I should say. But I know a lot of homeschoolers who do not do it because of religious reasons. They do it because it is a better kind of education, because 1-on-1 or 1-on-2, 1-on-3 is so much more effective than 1-to-30. It just is. And I've gone through many of those reasons. And so you can't just say, well, that's just a religious fanatic thing. I don't want to be like those religious zealots. No, homeschool because it's a better form of education, because your kids are going to learn. When I tell other parents that my kids, until they're about in 10th grade, they're done with school by lunchtime, they're like, what? That is not possible. Yeah, well, not my night owl. My night owl, she likes to do school later. So she's not done by noon, but she is done within a few hours, because you tailor their education, first of all, and then you teach them to teach themselves, and they start to fly through it. Now, there are some things as they get older, when they're working on projects and they're writing, obviously that's going to take a little longer. And so in high school, they're doing, maybe 5 hours. Never, ever have I spent an entire day in school teaching my kids. You get done so fast. And that's the thing when you're a teacher in schools, you're like, there's so much time wasted on discipline and explaining and explaining and re-explaining and re-explaining directions to the kids who aren't listening. Right? There's so much wasted time in a day in school. Is it any wonder that kids get so bored? No, of course they get bored. I would just encourage you. And we're going to wrap it up with this. All children can thrive homeschooling. All children can thrive in a charter school. All children can thrive in a Christian school. There is not, and yeah, you don't have to necessarily be a Christian to go to a Christian school, by the way. You do have to adhere to their rules. Your kid's not going to be able to, go in there and have a Satan shirt, walking around and, I worship Satan. You're just going to have to obey their rules. But there are benefits to having rules, for one thing. Like, rules are good. But all children, I'm specifically talking about homeschooling, and I'm going to challenge you to think about it. Mama, if you've been thinking and you're like, I don't know. They said my child is, a learning disability, and I don't really want to deal with that. And my child is on the spectrum, and I don't really want to. You know what? I'm going to say try it. Just go for it, because all children, and when I say all, I mean all, because I know children who have been, severely on the spectrum with autism. I've known kids who were mildly on the spectrum. I've known kids who had Asperger's. And I myself have a child with Downs, and he's almost 19 years old. And yeah, you know what? Nikki thrived. He thrived homeschooling. And the thing is that because especially you can tailor their education, you say, you know what? Maybe this year we don't focus on math. We just focus on learning to decode half of the sounds of the alphabet. Let's do that. And there is a lot of patience that's involved. But I can tell you that the relationship that you are going to develop with your kids and the relationship that they'll develop with one another I know I've heard a lot about, but kids are so much more compassionate to, kids with special needs in schools now because they're fully integrated, and they weren't really before. Nah. If you want to know what real compassion is, have your siblings take care of and try to teach their sibling with special needs. There is something magical that happens between those siblings. And it's something you can only experience when you do it. But when I say that all children can thrive, yeah, I know it can be scary. The thought of that can be scary. But, I don't know how to teach. Yeah, you can. You can. And yeah, I did say that teaching is an art, but you're their mama, you're their dad, you know your kids. You know how to reach them. You do it all the time anyway. When you just talk to your kids, like when you go to the baseball game and you're just sitting there talking, you have an intuitive knowing in your knower, right? How to have a conversation. Yeah, okay, sometimes you may feel like, no, you don't know my kid. I can't have a conversation at all. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your kids. You know if they're a wiggle worm, if they just love to read a book. You know it already. You may not realize you know it yet. So I would encourage you, if you've even thought about homeschooling, just jump off the cliff and try it. There are so many resources. You're not going to mess your kids up. You're not going to mess your kids up, I promise you. The only time I've ever told somebody that they shouldn't homeschool, and I actually did this once, once you're an established homeschooler of a bunch of kids, you get a lot of conversations along the way. And one time I did have to tell a mom I didn't think she was right for homeschooling because she was too angry. She had a hard time controlling her anger. That was a hard thing to say because you don't want to be, mean, but it was more loving to tell her the truth. And it was something that she knew already, that she really had to figure out a way to deal with her anger issues first, because it just would have made things worse having her kids at home and having this volcano rumbling in her all the time. And so that was the only time I've ever told a mom, I think maybe Christian school is a better idea for you. And she agreed. But by and large, all children thrive homeschooling. And mama, you will too. You will thrive. Yes, you'll be tired. Yes, you'll be longing for the days of going out for coffee with your friends or whatever it is that you love. But at the end of the day, when your little one brings you their drawing of you sitting at the table with them, you're like, oh man, I wouldn't have had that if I were at the office. I wouldn't have this picture. I wouldn't have this drawing. All I can say is just go for it. Just go for it. Don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to the naysayers that I'm like, we need public schools. They're the building blocks of the community. No, families. Families are the building blocks of the community. And mamas and dads, that's you building the building blocks of the community. So I would encourage you, step out, jump off the cliff, try it. You will not regret it.